Hello music lovers, welcome to episode 71 of What Makes This Song Special. As always, I've got a song for you that reminds me of a specific time in my life. What does it remind you of? What makes it a special song to you? What does it take you back to? I'll talk a wee bit about the song, a wee bit about the singer. I'll tell my wee story, and there'll be a part 2 where I will do my own cover version of today's song, which is of course Lou Reed, Perfect Day. So that's the introduction. Please hit subscribe. Before we do anything, hit that like button. That would make a massive difference to the algorithms that push the episodes in the channel. Thank you. So the story this week takes place late 1997, early 1998. So quite a long time ago now. Seems like yesterday to me, but a long time ago. I'd recently started at this point singing in front of people. I talk more about that in detail in my very first ever episode on the channel, so I won't rabbit on about it too much. But I'd gone from sort of zero to hero in school, sort of everybody knowing who I was and wanting me to sing and playing songs and all that kind of thing. And once the word spread, it was quite nice to be a bit more popular and well known at school, I suppose. So yeah, people just wanted to hear my songs and hear me sing, and it was a nice feeling, even though I used to sort of throw up before every performance due to the sort of sheer anxiety of standing in front of people and singing, which was a real issue for me. You know, a very sort of strange oxymoron, if you like, that I think a lot of people experience when they start performing at first, you know, although I definitely took it to extremes. But yeah, the attention was nice. I became quite popular at school, and with that came sort of new friends groups, parties, a feeling of sort of grown up, and yeah, it was nice time. So at this point, I'd started writing songs. I think I'd been writing songs maybe a couple of years by this point, but I started writing songs that kind of were complete rather than just a few lyrics of rhyming words on a page. And we were just about to start a high school band. It was maybe just before the band started, this band called The Initiative. So that was me, my mate Tony Dempsey and Scott Hanvey. And we had a couple of different drummers who came and went, but nobody ever sort of stayed on as an official member of the band. So it was a kind of three-piece. It was a band that wrote, dreamed, threatened to do something, but the truth is, apart from our big talent show win in 5th year at high school, and a couple of other little moments, it never really took off, that band. Never really got off the ground. We never managed to get a full set together to really start, you know, gigging regularly. But as I said, we were full of big dreams and aspirations, and we were keen to record something. And seeing as we hadn't really put the band together properly at this point, it was still a bit of a one-man show. It was really just me with my mate Tony, who would be in the band eventually, providing more in the way of sort of encouragement and guidance and moral support than he really was in any sort of musical sense at that point. I'd written what in retrospect was a really bad song. It was a really bad song. One of those total cheesy love songs that you write for some girl at school that you fancy, and then you think that's quite cool, and then when you look back, it's just, you cringe about it, and it's just dreadful. But anyway, I wanted to record this song, and all I had at the time was a kind of pirate version of Cubase. Cubase is like basically a music recording software. As I say, I got a pirate copy from the Barras in Glasgow, and I was able to put together a kind of really general MIDI synth 80s sounding backing track with some synths and MIDI sounds that also under re-examination sounded absolutely dreadful. But anyway, I was about 15, and I suppose at 15 it sounded pretty good for, you know, for what it was and what age we were. But the only thing I couldn't record on my pirate copy of Cubase was, of course, the vocals, because it wasn't that easy to record audio back then. You needed to go to a real recording studio for that, and it was expensive, really expensive. Nowadays there are millions of people who have setups in their houses and their bedrooms where you can actually record a pretty professional sounding track with a decent computer, some software plugins and a microphone, but not back then. So we booked into this recording studio in Charing Cross in the centre of Glasgow. I've no idea how we heard about the studio. I don't know what the link was. I don't know if we just looked in the yellow pages, for anybody that remembers the yellow pages. But I don't know if it was or word of mouth. I can't remember. We did actually know of a couple of other recording studios at the time. I don't know why we went there, but anyway, we end up there in this studio. Can't remember what it was called, but the producer was a guy called Raymond McHard, and he had booked us in one weekday evening to put the vocals down on my homemade backing track, which I think we'd saved on a mini disc or something to take into him so we could put the vocal down. So I think Tony's dad took us in. I remember not feeling well at all before we left the house. I remember like throwing up in the bathroom. And at that time in my life, I was suffering from a lot of like panic attacks and stuff. So I was never sure whether the ill feeling was just like anxiety or if it was actually that I was coming down with something. I felt really ill before we left. But anyway, we get to the studio and it's in this really cool old sandstone apartment above a row of shops and restaurants. And I managed to compose myself and I put down a vocal. And it was a really awesome experience. Like, I remember just thinking, oh man, I'm in a recording studio here. This is cool. I'm in a real recording studio with the cans on and trying to get a monitor mix. And it's first time I think I was ever like in a vocal recording booth. And I just remember feeling really at home in that environment. It was exciting, but it just felt right. Like I remember losing my shyness and sort of asking Raymond for more reverb in my vocal and asking him to try little things with the song to make it sound the way that I wanted. I just loved it. I just loved being in the studio. And at the end, we had this shiny CD with our first recording on it. And it honestly felt amazing to have made a physical song, a physical thing. It was really cool. So I called home from Raymond's phone beside the mixing desk and asked Mum for a lift. And she said my dad would pick me up as he was just finishing work, so he would jump into town to pick us up. So we waited for a while, looking out to see if we could see him coming. Back then we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't, my dad didn't have a sat nav in the car. It was the 90s. You just had to hope that who was picking you up found you, and that was it. So we waited and we waited and we waited. And after a while, there was this commotion at the end of the street. There was a police car, an ambulance, loads of traffic, something going on. And then more waiting and waiting and waiting. And eventually, after a few more calls home and a couple of hours of waiting, we somehow realised that the commotion with the ambulance and the police car at the end of the street had actually been my dad getting knocked down by a car on the main road. So he'd been looking for the recording studio, and I don't know if somebody was driving too fast. He sort of stepped out. He was looking up to see if he could find this recording studio for us. And he got hit by a car. So just felt sick and terrified of, worrying about how severe it was. And so, because I think Mum had just received a phone call from the police to say my dad was in the hospital. So I don't think she knew much either. So the rest was a kind of blur. I can't remember how we even got to the Western Hospital in Glasgow's West End, or much of the following few hours. But I remember getting to see my dad in the hospital room and apologising to him and just feeling so guilty that he was lying there in this bed with broken ribs and various other bashes and cuts and injuries, all because I'd asked for a lift home from town. So I felt really bad about it. And I remember just him saying, like, stop apologising, it's not your fault. And I just felt dreadful. But amidst the blur of that evening, I just have this vivid recollection of walking around the hospital. There was this bit at the very back of the hospital that had all these stairs that went down, sort of like a fire escape with all these stairs that went down the back. And I just kept walking up and down those steps and looking out of these big windows onto the West End of Glasgow, and just trying to make time pass before we found out, how severe the kind of head injury was and all that stuff. And all that kept going round my head the whole night was Perfect Day by Lou Reed. It just went on and on in my head. It was anything but a perfect day. But that song had been re-released as a single for a UK charity called Children in Need by the BBC. just a couple of months earlier, I think just like at the end of the previous year. And lots of celebrities and other pop stars at the time had kind of got involved with this song to sort of raise money for this children's charity. And yeah, it'd just been on radio and TV on repeat for weeks and weeks and weeks over Christmas and New Year. And now this, as I said, I think this was maybe like January at the time. And yeah, just the most ironic song to be in my head at such a terrible point, where it just, yeah, keeps going about a perfect day, as I walk around, a hospital in the middle of the night hoping that my dad was going to be okay, and worrying about, how I was going to sort of stay awake in school the next day. But thankfully, he made a full recovery, got out of hospital the following day, I think, and I think he had to nurse some pretty severe pain for a few weeks while he sort of healed some of the broken bones and cuts and things like that. But he was all right, which is the main thing. I had my shiny CD, and my pals that I let hear it, they all thought it was great, even though, as I said before, it really wasn't. But I suppose it was I suppose great considering the age and stage we were at, and I suppose the kind of real lack in experience that we had of actually recording, and of course the lack of an actual recording studio to put those things together. So a pretty terrible, cheesy song with some 80s production, but my voice sounded good on it, if I do say so myself. And from that, I think I got this real vision of what I wanted to do next. And that was, of course, keep making music, writing songs, arranging them, recording them, performing them, all of that, all of that. I just had this fire in my belly to keep making music, and it just felt like I'd found out what I was meant to do. Just feeling so great in that studio that night before it all went wrong. So yeah, there you go. There's my wee song, my wee story, about the song. That is, when I hear that song, I always remember that night. But also, to be fair, as well as that night, it always kind of takes me back to that time in my life when I was sort of entering the final couple of years of high school, starting to feel a bit more like a young adult, teachers starting to speak to you like humans as opposed to just like shout at you like a little kid. And we were getting a taste of what life was going to be like after school. For me, a life of recording studios and instruments and stages and musicians, just amazing, So that's what the song takes me back to. A great song. I'll talk a wee bit about the song, as I always do, a wee bit of research for you guys about the song before the episode. So it was written in 1972 by Lou Reed, of course, and it was actually from his Transformer album, and was the B-side to Walk on the Wild Side, which Walk on the Wild Side is probably Lou Reed's biggest hit, but maybe not. Well, maybe not, because Perfect Days probably over the years, as I'll explain, become maybe even a bigger song for him. But certainly the biggest hit at the time, Walk on the Wild Side, was his biggie. And then Perfect Day re-emerged in 1996 when it featured on the film Trainspotting, which again I mentioned in quite a bit of detail in a previous episode where I did Born Slippy. I'll maybe leave a link. I'll maybe forget to leave a link when I edit this, so just type it in. So yeah, and then in 1997, as I mentioned, at the end of 97, it reached number one from being that charity single from Children in Need. He also re-recorded a version in the early 2000s for another album. For some reason, I don't know why he re-recorded, but a re-recording, slightly different version. So it's been released a few times, and I think probably from all the re-releases, it might have become his biggest song of all time. But the original recording was produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson, who actually both feature on the album instrumentally too. Bowie was a Bowie. We had that debate on a previous episode as well. Bowie or Bowie. David Bowie, he actually was a huge fan of Velvet Underground and Lou Reed, and they became pals, and Bowie decided he wanted to produce the album and play on it as well, so pretty cool. The lyric, the big thing about this track's the lyrics. Like, a great lyric, and it was always said to have been about Lou Reed spending a day walking around Central Park in New York with his fiancée at the time, who became his wife, whilst out of his face on heroin, and just enjoying life in a sort of opiate reality slash fantasy, I suppose. But he also said that that wasn't necessarily about drugs, and maybe just a depiction of how a great day makes you forget about all the other stuff that you don't want to think about. So I think it's got a lovely double meaning in there. I think it's, on the surface, a song about a guy walking around enjoying the simple things in life: flowers, nature, his wife to be, the sunny Central Park. But really, on the flip side, he's talking about how, like, drugs were sort of masking the self-hatred and problems that he had going on in his mind. So I think it's an amazing double meaning, and a really beautiful lyric, which can be, as I said, taken as whatever you want it to be taken as. What kind of love song is it? Is it a love for people? Is it a love for nature? Is it a love for life, or is it a love for the escapism of a drug? Who knows? But yeah, just a great song. Just such a great song. As a singer, Lou Reed was probably more of a poet slash songwriter who used his voice as a sort of vehicle to convey his stories and his lyrics, as opposed to being a great singer as such. I always feel kind of bad saying that. Any Lou Reed fans out there, I'm not slagging him off. Obviously a fantastic artist, but not a technically amazing singer. There's not a lot I can really say about his technique as such, other than that he was amazing at connecting emotionally to the subject matter of his songs, which, as I've said to many of my vocal students over the years and on the channel in many cases about many singers, that's sometimes just as, if not more important than being able to sing like an angel with power and great range and all that stuff. You need that ability to get into people's hearts and really pull the emotion out of them. And that's what, a great songwriter is able to do. And that is what Lou Reed was able to do with the way he delivered his lyrics through his voice. So there you go. There's my wee story. I've kept it quite short this week. Short and sweet, but that's what the song always reminds me of. That kind of crazy night, recording in a studio for the first time, but also just that time in my life where I was sort of just on that periphery of sort of becoming a young adult and wondering what I was going to do with my life. And yeah, that's what it reminds me of. That's what it takes me back to. An amazing song. Please hit part 2 whenever it comes up, for my cover version of Lou Reed's Perfect Day. I'll be back next week with another song, another story. Until then, please hit the subscribe button, like, share, watch as many times as you can. It really helps. And thanks so much for tuning in.